Nobody on that beach could see the flames anymore. The smoke was too thick. The sky above Malakuta had turned a deep, violent red, glowing like the horizon was on fire itself. Families stood shoulder to shoulder near the waterline, clutching children, pets, and whatever they had managed to save. Ash drifted through the air like snow. Sirens screamed somewhere behind the town. Then came the realization that terrified everyone. The fire was moving faster than the evacuation orders. Roads were already blocked. Forests on both sides of the town were burning. Thousands of people had nowhere left to run except the ocean in front of them. Emergency radios crackled nonstop as exhausted crews tried to understand what was happening. Then, one voice cut through the chaos. The entire town is burning. In that moment, Australia's bushfire crisis stopped feeling like another bad fire season. It felt like the beginning of something far worse. Long before the skies turned red, Australia was already breaking apart under heat. 2019 became one of the hottest and driest years the country had ever recorded. Month after month passed with almost no meaningful rain. Paddocks cracked open, forest floors dried into brittle layers of leaves and bark. Farmers watched dams empty and rivers retreat from their banks. Across New South Wales and Queensland, drought spread over huge parts of the country. By winter, firefighters were already warning that the bushfire season was arriving dangerously early. The damage was happening slowly enough that many people barely noticed it at first. Trees weakened under relentless heat. Grasslands faded into pale brown fields. In some forests, eucalyptus leaves became so dry they could ignite almost instantly. Creeks that normally slowed fire movement had shrunk to thin streams or disappeared completely. Every hot wind stripped more moisture from the land. By the end of the year, millions of hectares across southeastern Australia had effectively become fuel waiting for a single spark. Then the first fires arrived. Lightning storms ignited bushland in remote areas of Queensland and northern New South Wales. Small fires appeared along highways, forests, and farmland. Fire crews responded quickly, as they always had. Australia was no stranger to bushfires. Most seasons brought smoke, evacuations, and difficult weeks for rural communities. At first, these fires seemed no different, dangerous, but familiar. And that familiarity created a false sense of confidence. People trusted the system because it had worked before. Volunteer firefighters had contained major bushfires for decades. Communities knew the routines. Watch the warnings. Pack the car. Stay alert. Few people realized the conditions building across the country were unlike anything firefighters had faced in modern Australian history. By September, weather experts were sounding increasingly urgent warnings. Extreme heat, violent winds, and historic drought were colliding at the same time. Fire danger ratings climbed higher across New South Wales and Queensland as temperatures pushed past previous records. Some regions were already experiencing catastrophic fire conditions months before peak summer normally arrived. Former fire chiefs publicly warned that Australia was unprepared for what was coming. But outside emergency circles, most people still believed the worst-case scenarios would never actually happen. Then the lightning storms arrived. But these storms carried almost no rain. Bolts struck dry forests and grasslands across huge stretches of countryside, igniting fires deep inside remote terrain. In some areas, crews watched new blazes appear almost simultaneously across the horizon. Fires began burning in places too rugged and isolated to reach quickly. Every fresh ignition stretched firefighters thinner. And as strong winds pushed embers ahead of the flames, small fires started multiplying into larger ones. Veteran firefighters began noticing something deeply unsettling. These fires were not behaving normally. Flames moved faster than expected and changed direction without warning. Burning embers traveled kilometers ahead of the fire front, igniting spot fires far beyond containment lines. Some crews described heat so intense it felt impossible to stand near. Others watched towering smoke columns generate powerful winds of their own. Quietly, among experienced firefighters, a realization was beginning to spread. This season was different. At first, the fires were tracked as separate emergencies, one burning near the coast, another deep inside national parkland, others scattered across mountain ranges and rural towns. But as winds strengthened and containment lines failed, the fires began moving toward each other. Small blazes merged into larger complexes. Then larger complexes merged again. In New South Wales, massive fire fronts stretched across hundreds of kilometers of forest and farmland. Fire crews were no longer fighting isolated bushfires. They were confronting walls of fire so large they could be seen from space. Then, the heat waves arrived. Temperatures surged past 40 degrees Celsius across huge parts of the country. In some areas, the air itself felt furnace hot. Dry eucalyptus forests ignited with explosive speed, sending flames racing through treetops faster than crews could respond. Firefighters described embers flying far ahead of the main front, starting new fires almost instantly. Entire hillsides erupted at once. Every day of extreme heat pushed the fires beyond previous limits. Soon, even cities far from the flames began disappearing behind smoke. Sydney woke beneath a thick orange haze that turned daylight into something dim and unnatural. Office towers faded behind smoke. People covered their mouths while walking through streets coated in ash. Air quality levels climbed so high that health experts compared breathing outside to smoking dozens of cigarettes a day. In Canberra, smoke became so severe it recorded some of the worst air quality on Earth. Across Australia, anxiety spread faster than the fires themselves. Emergency alerts began arriving one after another. Phones buzzed through the night as residents were told to leave immediately. Highways filled with long lines of cars carrying families, animals, fuel cans, and whatever belongings could fit inside. But the fires were moving unpredictably. Some evacuation routes closed within hours. Others became trapped behind smoke, fallen trees, or advancing flames. In several coastal towns, people slowly realized the roads out might already be gone. Then, everything changed in a matter of hours. Containment lines that crews had defended for days suddenly collapsed almost everywhere at once. Violent winds pushed flames across roads, rivers, and fire breaks with terrifying speed. Some fires created their own weather systems, throwing embers kilometers ahead of the main front. Firefighters watched blazes jump unpredictably from ridge to ridge. What had been dangerous was now catastrophic. Emergency centers were overwhelmed almost instantly. 000 operators struggled to keep up as thousands of calls poured in from trapped residents reporting fires at their doors. Crews were exhausted, equipment was stretched thin, and resources had to be divided between multiple disasters happening simultaneously. Then power grids began failing. Communication towers went dark. Entire towns lost contact with the outside world just as the fires closed in around them. People fled any way they could. Highways became tunnels of smoke and flame as families drove through burning forests with ash swirling across their windshields. In some areas, the sky turned completely black in the middle of the afternoon. Drivers could barely see the cars ahead of them. Trees exploded into fire beside the roads, while emergency broadcasts crackled through radios, warning residents to keep moving no matter what waited ahead. Entire communities vanished in a single night. In towns across New South Wales and Victoria, firestorms moved with terrifying speed, swallowing streets house by house before many residents even understood how close the flames were. Cars melted in driveways. Petrol stations exploded. Families ran toward beaches and evacuation centers, carrying only what they could hold in their arms. Some people sheltered inside bathrooms while roofs burned above them. Others returned the next morning to find nothing left except chimneys standing alone in fields of ash. The landscape itself looked alive with fire. Walls of flame rolled across forests and mountain ranges, climbing treetops faster than firefighters could track them. Kangaroos leapt through smoke-covered roads, while exhausted koalas clung to burning trees. Birds scattered into skies already darkened by ash. Entire national parks disappeared behind orange clouds as centuries-old forests burned uncontrollably. The sound was constant. Cracking timber. Roaring wind. Sirens somewhere in the distance. For many residents, it felt less like a wildfire and more like the land itself was collapsing. Then, the fires became something even more dangerous. The heat rising from the infernos grew so intense that some fire systems started creating their own weather. Towering pyrocumulonimbus clouds formed above the flames, generating violent winds, dry lightning, and sudden fire tornadoes. In certain areas, lightning from these storm clouds sparked entirely new fires kilometers away. Experienced crews described conditions they had rarely witnessed before. Fire behavior became impossible to predict. Winds changed direction without warning. Flames moved faster than evacuation models had expected. Nature itself seemed to turn against every attempt to stop the disaster, and from space, the scale became impossible to ignore. Satellite images showed enormous smoke plumes spreading across southeastern Australia and drifting thousands of kilometers over the Pacific Ocean. Entire coastlines disappeared beneath thick gray clouds. The glow of the fires was visible from orbit. Around the world, millions watched images of Australia burning, almost in real time. What had started as another bushfire season had become one of the largest environmental disasters in the country's history. By nightfall, the beaches were filled with families who had nowhere else to go. Thousands gathered along Australia's coastline as burning embers drifted through the air like snow. The ocean behind them was black and silent. The fire in front of them glowed deep red against the sky. Parents wrapped children in blankets and tried to keep them calm while emergency boats moved slowly through heavy smoke offshore. Some people wore masks, others covered their mouths with wet towels. Everyone waited, watching the hills burn through the darkness. Morning brought a different kind of shock. Entire neighborhoods were simply gone. Streets people had lived on for decades had been reduced to ash overnight. Twisted metal, collapsed roofs, burned-out cars. Survivors walked silently through the ruins searching for anything left behind. Many escaped with nothing except the clothes they had been wearing when evacuation orders arrived. Homes, photographs, pets, family history, all erased within hours. And still, firefighters stayed on the front lines. Many crews worked through extreme heat and choking smoke with almost no sleep. Volunteers and emergency workers pushed themselves beyond exhaustion as fires kept changing direction without warning. Faces blackened by ash, eyes red from smoke. Some remained deployed for days, moving from one emergency zone to another while conditions grew increasingly impossible to control. But the destruction reached far beyond human communities. Across Australia, forests burned on a scale scientists struggled to comprehend. Millions of animals were killed, injured, or driven from their habitats as flames tore through ecosystems that had existed for generations. Burned koalas appeared beside roads searching for water. Vast stretches of bushland fell silent. In some regions, the environmental loss was so severe that experts warned recovery could take decades. Then, finally, the rain arrived. After months of fire and smoke, dark clouds moved across the country and heavy rain began falling over the burned landscape. Firefighters who had spent weeks battling the infernos stood silently as water hit the ash-covered ground. But for many towns, the relief came far too late. Homes were already gone. Forests had already burned. Entire lives had already been changed forever. What remained looked almost unreal. Blackened streets stretched through silent communities where houses once stood. Burned vehicles sat abandoned beside collapsed buildings. Trees were reduced to charred skeletons across hills and valleys that had once been green. In some places, the smell of smoke still lingered long after the flames disappeared. Residents returned home slowly, walking through destruction that no longer felt familiar. But the disaster had already spread far beyond Australia. Smoke from the fires traveled across the atmosphere for weeks, circling the planet and reaching countries thousands of kilometers away. Satellite imagery tracked enormous plumes drifting over the Pacific Ocean and into South America. What happened in Australia was no longer just a national tragedy. The entire world had witnessed it unfold. And as recovery efforts began, difficult questions followed. Scientists, emergency officials, and communities started debating whether warnings had been ignored and whether the country had been truly prepared for conditions this extreme. Conversations about climate change, fire management, and future risks grew louder. Because beneath the ashes, one fear remained impossible to ignore. This might not be the last time Australia faces a disaster like this. This was never the result of a single fire. What happened across Australia came from countless factors building together at the same time. Extreme heat, historic drought, violent winds, dry lightning, forests already pushed to their limits. One spark alone could not create devastation on this scale. For years, the land had been drying out. Record-breaking temperatures and prolonged drought slowly transformed huge sections of the country into combustible fuel. Forest floors became brittle. Vegetation lost moisture. Rivers and wetlands shrank under relentless heat. By the time the fires arrived, many landscapes were already primed to burn faster and harder than during previous fire seasons, and the warnings had existed long before the disaster. Scientists and fire experts had repeatedly warned that Australia's bushfire seasons were becoming longer, hotter, and increasingly unpredictable. Reports raised concerns about extreme fire weather and the growing risks tied to climate conditions. But, as the years passed, those warnings began turning into reality. What frightened many firefighters most was not just the size of the fires, but their behavior. These fires moved differently. They created their own storms, changed direction suddenly, and spread with an intensity even experienced crews struggled to understand. For many experts, the Black Summer fires felt like a glimpse into a dangerous new era where nature itself was beginning to behave differently. Slowly, the land began breathing again. Months after the fires, small green shoots pushed through the ash-covered ground. Trees that looked completely destroyed showed signs of life once more. Rainwater filled burned riverbeds, and wildlife cautiously returned to damaged forests. Even after devastation on an unimaginable scale, nature quietly began rebuilding itself. But for many people, the damage never truly disappeared. Survivors still remembered the sound of sirens in the middle of the night. Firefighters carried memories of exhausted crews, burning towns, and lives they could not save. Entire communities rebuilt homes and roads, yet the emotional scars remained far longer than the smoke itself. Every summer now carried a new kind of fear. Because the disaster never felt like a one-time event, Australia continues facing longer and more dangerous fire seasons as extreme conditions become increasingly common. And long after the flames of Black Summer vanished, one feeling remained across the country: the fires ended. But the fear of the next one never did.